This is Kellogg's Corn Flakes cereal. It may seem like a simple breakfast, but it took years to perfect. No one knew how to make it. That was until two brothers discovered the truth after thousands of tries. Mold. By rolling moldy dough into thin flakes and baking them, they had finally created the perfect recipe. Soon, the world would be introduced to their cornflake cereal, but it came at their expense. This video is sponsored by RuneScape. Re-explore the world of RuneScape with Fresh Start Worlds, the 4-month event exclusive to members where players can experience a completely reset RuneScape with a new account. Play with your friends like it's the first time in this high fantasy open MMORPG, exploring the ever-changing and evolving world where you shape how your own character adventures along with quests, and grows their skills with exciting challenges. In RuneScape's Fresh Start Worlds, all players start as equals with fresh characters from scratch, playing in a reset world with a new economy and grand exchange. Whether you're a complete beginner in RuneScape or jumping in again after a hiatus, there's something new for everyone. Grow your skills at an accelerated pace with an increased XP rate and gameplay buffs during the first 8 weeks. You can move your new character to the main game at any time with the progressions and rewards earned during Fresh Start Worlds. Get 7 days of membership through Amazon's Prime Gaming or click our link in the description to download RuneScape and experience Fresh Start Worlds today. Before the introduction of cereal, breakfast was an ordeal. Even if you wanted simple porridge, you had to wake up hours before breakfast, start a fire, and melt whole grains. Breakfasts were often cured meats, potatoes fried in fat, and foods high in animal fats, salt, and sugar. These greasy foods plagued Americans with painful stomach aches. But that would change with the Kellogg brothers. John Kellogg was born in 1852 to John Preston and Aunt Jeanette. His parents became Seventh-day Adventists shortly after his birth. The family moved from a rural community in Livingston County to Jackson, Michigan. 3 years later, they moved to Battle Creek, the location of the Adventist church headquarters. When John was 8, his little brother Will was born. Will was the 7th of 16 children his parents had, but many of them did not survive childhood. Seventh-day Adventists practiced strict lifestyles and preached health and purity as religious duties. This profoundly affected John, whose life work upheld these principles. Though he was smaller than his siblings and very sickly, almost losing his life to tuberculosis, John grew up as the golden child. He was far and away his mother's favorite and recognized as brilliant from a young age. He loved to read and learn on his own, and when he did go to school at age 10, he surpassed his classmates in all topics. At age 12, the Adventist church recognized his intelligence and decided to nurture it. The church's publisher, James White, took John in as an apprentice. John spent 4 years as a publishing apprentice for the church. During this time, he'd read many articles written by Ellen G. White that influenced him. Ellen was the church's prophetess. She often wrote about health and hygiene improvements for the community. Intrigued, John began studying other health reformers with a focus on diet. On the other hand, poor Will began life already in his older brother's shadow. His father believed Will was so unintelligent that teaching him to read was a waste of time. At school, his teacher said he was responsible but slow to learn and not very bright. Many years later, Will discovered the reason for his struggles in school. He was severely nearsighted. He couldn't read the blackboard as a child without glasses. On top of all of Will's troubles, John bullied him without mercy. John insulted his brother, played mean pranks, and tattled on him to ensure cruel punishments. He also hit Will badly enough that the younger brother did not fully recover. Will spent his formative years feeling intense insecurity. He never felt smart enough, loved enough, or deserving of good things. As his parents didn't think there was any point in educating him past age 10, Will dropped out when he was 13. He began working full-time at his father's broom factory, where he became a strong worker. Will supervised the other boys while supporting himself as a salesman by age 14. Meanwhile, John continued on his shining path. He attended medical school at Bellevue College in New York City. John's interest in diet and digestion had intensified in college. He saw the epidemic of indigestion in the country and blamed the common American diet. This began John's lifelong war against fried food, meat, seafood, sugar, caffeine, and alcohol. John graduated from medical school at 24. The next year, the young doctor took charge of a health facility in Battle Creek, Michigan. The small facility had been opened 10 years earlier by Ellen, the Adventist prophet. John turned it into a medical center, spa, and hotel called the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Guests could cleanse their bodies with baths, enemas, exercises, and diet reforms. At Battle Creek, guests ate a diet of wheat gluten mush, oatmeal crackers, graham rolls, and a grass tea. Meat was avoided. John believed meat products remained in your gut after a meal and would rot and pollute your body. He claimed the meat's toxins caused indigestion, bloating, depression, and even stupidity. A healthy gut was very important to Americans at the time. Everyone was concerned about digestion, even American presidents. Battle Creek became a celebrity destination, and many went for John's treatments. The list of the sanitarium's guests includes President Warren Harding and William Taft, Eleanor Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Amelia Earhart. To ensure smooth operations, John hired his brother Will as his assistant. Will worked 17-hour days to make the sanitarium run with hardly a word of thanks from his brother. Will managed payrolls, bills, guest complaints, publicity, marketing, and daily operations. He launched and managed many Battle Creek spin-off businesses, including a publishing company and a clothing line. No matter how hard he worked, though, the doctor looked down on him and even called him lazy when he wanted to see his family. Still, Will continued to work at the sanitarium non-stop, along with being John's personal valet, shoe shiner, and note-taker. Will would even have to jot down notes while running after John as he rode his bicycle or while standing by the stall as his brother relieved himself on the toilet. For all his work and suffering, and never getting to see his family, Will brought home only $87 a month. In his diary, he wrote, "I feel kind of blue. I'm afraid that I will always be a poor man the way things look now." Will couldn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, but an opportunity was coming to life right in front of him. At Battle Creek, John served foods that would help keep one's digestive tracts clear. One of these early foods was Zwieback bread, a double-baked, dry, and tasteless biscuit served without butter, water, or milk. Most guests hated the dry bread, and one woman even broke her dentures on it. After she stormed into John's office to demand money for a replacement, the doctor set out to find a way to make it more easily digestible and healthier. John believed baking the grains at a high temperature for a long time would help. After trying it out, he discovered that this process broke down the sugar and starch content, and that when the loaves were cooled, he could slice and push them through a strainer to produce crumbs. John called the product granula and served it to his sanitarium guests. Will sensed an opportunity and came up with an idea for a mail order company for granula. This way, people could keep up the sanitarium diet even outside of Battle Creek. Unfortunately, the sanitarium's board of directors didn't see the value in John's health foods. Ignoring them, John founded a new venture called Battle Creek Sanitarium Health Food Company and gave Will a 25% share in exchange for running it. Meanwhile, other doctors and dietitians in America were developing very similar health foods. One man, Dr. James Jackson had already created a ready-to-eat cereal that was also named Granula. James sued John, resulting in John renaming his product Granola. Another competitor was lawyer Henry Perky. He had a product made from raw wheat called shredded wheat. One day, a Battle Creek Sanitarium patient told John that shredded wheat had helped her digestion. John went to Denver to meet Henry and the two bonded over their shared ideas. The doctor made an offer to buy shredded wheat from Henry, but then gave a lower offer that Henry refused. To make matters worse, Henry also took John's idea about baking at high temperatures for a long time. This made shredded wheat much more pleasant to eat. The product became one of the most popular cereals in America. Will was especially frustrated and discouraged about the loss. John swore that the brothers would invent a better food and win out in the end. Both eager to achieve that goal, the two continued to experiment with recipes in their kitchen laboratory, leading to the creation of their wheat flake cereal recipe. The brothers tell different stories about the creation of the wheat flakes cereal recipe, and while historians were unable to verify which is true, we do know that the invention involved thousands of tries and one mistake. In John's story, it was in his wife Ella's kitchen that the recipe was invented. Equipped with a degree in nutrition, she assisted John on thousands of trials, with both of them making suggestions. John also claims that a dream told him to roll the dough into thin films to be scraped off before baking. The doctor states that one night when he and Ella were working, he was called away for emergency surgery. He left the dough and continued the process a day later, even though the dough had grown mold. To their shock, the cereal flakes were now perfect. In Will's story, he and John were both important partners contributing to the perfect recipe. One Friday, they were working and decided to get some rest after several 14-hour workdays. Will, always looking to save business costs, placed the fresh dough into a container instead of throwing it out. The next day was the Adventist Sabbath, and the brothers could not work. It was after midnight when they returned to the experiment. Though the dough had molded, they continued to roll, scrape, and bake it. The brothers discovered that it now resulted in beautiful, ideal flakes. Regardless of the exact version of events, wheat flake cereal had been invented. The brothers served the flakes during a conference for Seventh-day Adventists. Everyone at Battle Creek loved the cereal flakes and lined up for more. The cereal was found to be especially tasty when mixed with milk, cream, or yogurt. John named the cereal Granos. It was great for guests' digestion and cured their stomach aches. The doctor patented the recipe as the sole owner, once again overlooking his brother. Will hired bakers and workers to help produce Granos. In 1 year, they sold and served almost 115,000 pounds of the wheat flake cereal. After 3 years, Will rented out a building to serve as a production factory. The factory operated 24/7 and Will was working 120 hours every week. He juggled duties at the Sanitarium, the Granos factory, and Battle Creek's publishing house and its other companies. Will's biggest success came from a very simple realization. While people with severe indigestion issues bought Granos, many more would buy a convenient breakfast if it just tasted good. He began to fiddle with the cereal recipe, looking for the perfect, tasty result. But he was already far behind a competitor who was capitalizing on the cereal market. Charlie Post was a former patient at Battle Creek Sanitarium. He had painful indigestion issues, used a wheelchair, and was in poor health. Charlie and his wife frequented the sanitarium during the day when its treatments were cheaper. The couple had very little money. To pay the bills, Charlie assisted Will with recipes in the kitchen laboratory. After a year at the sanitarium, Charlie paid up his bill and left. He purchased a land plot 10 miles outside of Battle Creek and opened a medical boarding house. Then, Charlie began to produce and sell health foods under the name C.W. Post. One of his products was Postum, a direct copy of John's Minute Brew, a coffee substitute made from caramelized molasses. But C.W. Post's most popular item was cereal. His first one, Grape Nuts, was identical to Battle Creek's granola, but with maltose sweetener added. It was a hit. The Kellogg cereal sales were insignificant compared to Charlie's. As Charlie had seen their recipes while working in the kitchen, the Kellogg brothers knew he'd stolen them. By then, Will had become quite the businessman and grew frustrated that someone else was making a fortune off the Kellogg cereals. Will desperately wanted to expand the business, but John always shot down his ideas. Fed up, Will finally decided to leave. He told his brother that he was quitting the Sanitarium to focus on the food industry. He packed up his desk and for the first time in his life set out to be free from John's control. Unfortunately, tragedy struck and ruined Will's plans. 6 months after he quit, the Sanitarium's night watchman came upon an enormous fire in the pharmacy. Firefighters responded only a minute later and extinguished the flames, but before they could pack up, the ground underneath them collapsed. They were on top of an underground tunnel and realized that the source of the fire was still burning in the tunnel. They tried to combat the flames, but it was too late. Battle Creek Sanitarium burned to the ground. Will was torn. Battle Creek, where he had spent 20 years, was his life's work. John was out of town the day of the fire, so Will met with the board of directors and offered to return for free. He spent 2.5 more years at the Sanitarium. Having to go back to work for his brother without pay and with the new responsibility of securing funds made for a miserable time. Will recalled those years as the worst in his life. Battle Creek had its grand opening 2 years after the fire. Will continued to run operations, a monumental task with the new sanitarium that now employed several hundred employees. Still, Will found time to try and improve the Kellogg cereal recipes, which now included wheat flakes and corn flakes. One day, Will decided to experiment with the cornflakes cereal recipe by adding ingredients his brother would never allow him to use, like salt, sugar, and malt, and use only the grit of the corn. The result was crunchier, crispier flakes with a nutty, corny, pleasant taste that consumers were sure to love. Unfortunately, when Will perfected the recipe, Charlie copied that as well and sold the cereal as Post Toasties. While millions of boxes of Post Toasties were being sold, Will remained undeterred on bringing his recipe to market. There was just one problem. He knew John would never agree since they contained ingredients that went against the Sanitarium diet. Desperate, Will offered to buy the cereal part of the business from John. John only agreed since he was in debt and didn't believe that Will could succeed. Will had to give John $170,000 in cash and shares. Will wound up in deep debt to venture on his own, but that would quickly become the least of his problems. Only 1 year after Will founded his new business, the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company, his factory burned to the ground. It would take a year for the factory to be rebuilt, but Will wasted no time in continuing business. He ordered his employees to work in a different location and even launched clever campaigns, including advertising to mothers and children through full-page newspaper ads and putting coupons, then surprise prizes, in cereal boxes. Around this time, Will also made a huge branding change, renaming his business the Kellogg Toasted Cornflake Company and displaying his signature on cereal boxes that now featured bright red and green colors. Soon after, Will was selling more boxes than ever before, over 100,000 cases per day. Meanwhile, John was fuming. The Sanitarium struggled to fill Will's shoes after he left and was not well run. And while Will was selling his cereals, John was unable to happily watch his brother succeed. The spiteful doctor began making his own cereals to compete with his brother's cornflakes. One was a cereal made of rice flakes, and the other was sterilized wheat bran flakes. John then launched his cereals under the name the Kellogg's Food Company of Battle Creek and packaged them in boxes similar to Will's. Both grocers and customers got confused and thought the two brothers' products were from the same company. Will sued John for copyright infringement, and John countersued in response. All in all, the Kellogg brothers' court battle raged on for 10 years. A jealous and bitter John dragged on legal proceedings as Will's business, later renamed the Kellogg Company, boomed. John made various claims that Will was hurting his business and made threats to sue to wear Will down. John argued that he had a worldwide reputation as a top doctor and that the name Kellogg was tied to his image. He said that Will's abilities and contributions to cereal were minimal. According to John, he himself had invented flake cereal among other foods. He argued that the famous Kellogg signature on Will's cereal was an attempt to exploit John's reputation. On the other side of the fight, Will claimed that John had intentionally copied Will's branding. He said the doctor wanted to capitalize on and steal Will's success. According to Will, the brothers were equal partners in inventing flake cereal, but the changes from the original recipe to Corn Flakes belonged to only Will himself. Somehow, the two sides came to an agreement outside of court. John acknowledged that Will's company was the only owner of the Kellogg's brand. This meant only Will could use the name on products. In exchange, Will allowed John to call his company Kellogg Food Company. However, John wasn't allowed to noticeably display the Kellogg name on his cereal. The peace between brothers did not last long. One of John's cereals, made of sterilized wheat bran, was invented as a cure to constipation. When the product picked up in sales, John had jumped on the rising interest and used his brother's mass advertising techniques. Soon enough, John was selling over 500,000 boxes of cereal per year. The box prominently showed the Kellogg name, but the doctor argued that this did not break the agreement between brothers. He said the agreement only concerned Corn Flakes, while he was selling wheat bran. To retaliate, Will began to sell two types of Kellogg's brand that were similar to John's product. They were instant hits. John then filed a restraining order against his younger brother, and the two once again wound up in court. The judge not only ruled in Will's favor, but also said the profits John had made from cereals in the past 10 years actually belonged to Will. The doctor was ordered to stop trying to manipulate the public by using the Kellogg name. John immediately appealed the case to the Michigan Supreme Court. Every one of the 8 members of the state Supreme Court voted in Will's favor and upheld the judge's decision. Will owned the Kellogg name, as well as any money John had made from cereals branded as Kellogg's. The court also ordered John to pay Will's legal bills, which were more than $225,000. Will told his brother to pay only the legal bills. He was willing to forget about the profit payment, but John was too proud to accept the offer. He wrote Will a check for the full amount, saying that they now would have no reason to bother each other. John's words were true. For the rest of their lives, the brothers hardly spoke a word to each other. They both lived very long lives, with Will building his cereal business and John continuing to focus on health and the Sanitarium. In his final years, John felt remorse for his lifelong bullying of his younger brother and even dictated a 7-page letter to Will. In the letter, John regretted his behavior and wanted to make up for his mistakes. He congratulated Will on his achievements and said that Will's name would be remembered for generations to come. John never got a response to his letter. The brothers' last face-to-face meeting was a year later. The doctor invited Will over, hoping to secure a loan to lift the Sanitarium out of debt. Will insisted that John step away from the Sanitarium for good. The conversation started off as civil, but became tense as they brought up past arguments. The next year, John passed away at the age of 91. He developed viral paralysis that left him bedridden before he fell into a coma and took his last breath. 5 years later, the mystery of why Will never responded to his brother's apology was solved. John's secretary had never delivered the letter. She thought it was embarrassing to the great doctor and showed weakness and a loss of reasoning. She put the letter into a file cabinet, where it stayed until being found and delivered to Will 6 years after John's death. By the time Will received the letter, he was blind from glaucoma and needed his nurse to read it out loud to him. Overcome with emotion, Will was silent. Tears filled his eyes. For the rest of his days, he carried a picture of his brother's gravestone in his wallet. 3 years later, Will developed leukemia and passed away at the same age as his brother, 91. Sadly, very few family members wept at his passing, and those who did also felt a great relief. Will had been a stern, unforgiving old man whose harsh behavior ended his marriage and distanced his children and grandchildren. In the following years, the Kellogg Company became widely known all over the US and the rest of the world. First, the company launched new cereals and created mascots for each one, including Tony the Tiger, Snap, Crackle and Pop, Toucan Sam, and Cornelius the Rooster. Kellogg also expanded into other types of breakfast and snack foods, including Pop-Tarts, Eggos, Pringles, and Nutri-Grain bars. Today, the company is one of the largest food companies in America and is rated as one of the most valuable food brands worldwide, bringing in over $14 billion in revenue. This is the story of how two brothers who were both brilliant in their fields but ruthless in business invented one of the most famous breakfast foods in the world. For more interesting stories about today's biggest companies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Remember to click our link in the description to play RuneScape's Fresh Start Worlds to experience the world of Gielinor from scratch today.